Hi everybody. So this is our second critique for milestone 1, and in this particular assignment what you were doing is in a way quite similar to what we previously worked on in task 1, where we're really starting to just be aware of positive and negative space. Um, the difference with this one on a technical or criteria level is that now you can use as many shapes as you want. You can also change the size of the shapes. But the sort of the same principle is in place, that we're starting to really consider what negative spaces do in a design. As I would say, somebody who's not aware of design principles or hasn't really um, thought a lot about design tends to see negative or the positive spaces only. Whatever those positive spaces, it doesn't matter if they're white or black, it just depends on how they look. Like here we see these are positive spaces, and here we see the white is negative space or is positive spaces. So it doesn't really matter what color it is. It's just how the eye perceives what is a positive space. If like you take a camera and you're photographing, let's say you're taking a portrait, just a picture of somebody. The person is the positive space, but all of the space around them is also really important, that negative space. And as you develop your eye as an artist or a designer, you start really noticing that negative space. And that's why you see, you've probably done this yourself. When you've taken a photograph, you've kind of moved your, the frame. This is the frame right here, around our design. You've kind of moved it around so that you get that positive space exactly where you want it, where it makes sense, so the negative space arranges around it in a really interesting way as well. You can see next time you take a picture with your camera, even just a snapshot, notice how you start to do that. And the more, I think, just the more comfortable you get with working with composition, the more you don't even think whether it's positive or negative. You just start wanting to create a nice composition. The other thing we're doing with this particular assignment is, well, no, actually, I think I've covered it all. Pulling things off the edge of the space of the page. Oh, maybe I haven't mentioned that. Yeah, so pulling things off the edge of the page. Back to that camera example, oftentimes, you might crop your design where, not all of your positive space is within the frame, and you do that for a lot of reasons. It just creates a more interesting composition. It allows you to design your space a little bit more, refined way. It opens the space up. It sort of allows the eye to kind of maybe move off of the space, kind of imagine what's behind, to the sides. It really creates a more interesting space. So that's one of the things we're thinking about in this assignment, is pulling things, cropping things off. A lot of times when people start in design, they want to put everything in the middle, in the center, or kind of, they look at the frame here as being a boundary that they can't cross. But crossing that boundary is oftentimes where things can get very interesting. So we'll take a look at that too, and make sure that everybody is um, working with the edges of that plane. Hi, Delchi. So you mentioned that you're still trying to get the hang of Photoshop. Yeah, again, it takes a while. I'm not sure if you have Illustrator or if you have worked in Illustrator before, but sometimes people say that Illustrator is easier to work with when it comes to shapes like this. So if you do have Illustrator and you want to, learn a new program, you might want to try that. Or just keep going with Photoshop. You know, I think you're doing well with it. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that your design to me looks like you really have, used all of the things that we're wanting to work with in this assignment, of pulling things off the edge of the page. You've done that really beautifully, all four sides, which is wonderful. And you've also done a lot of overlapping, which is the other thing the assignment wants us to do, is to try to overlap things, to kind of like take shapes and create, the overlapping process. What that does is it joins shapes together. So now we have this whole kind of interesting unit, and here, with all this overlapping, which just creates a lot more. What it does is it creates more interesting shape areas, because we're blending shapes together. But it also does really interesting things with the positive and negative spaces. So we now have this shape that's creating, there's the white here is a negative space, but we're getting, this interesting sort of cutout shapes in here. It's like cutting out and, going in and out. It's really, makes it very interesting. So yeah, I think this looks really good. It feels like very well crafted and kind of thoughtfully put together. So I think your assignment is complete. I don't see any the changes that you need to make for this. So for the final submission at the end of this week, which is Wednesday, you can just submit this as is, and you know, take note of that in your milestone report. There's a few different questions for each of the tasks that we're doing that you'll see in the milestone. Once we get to the final submission, in the milestone report area, they'll have questions and you can just fill those out. That's true for everybody. Just make sure that when you're completing the final assignment or final submission that you have the written part in there. Just as a note, that everything else you do in terms of writing in this class in the task threads is mostly optional, really, including commenting on other folks. It's encouraged, but it's not a requirement. So the only real requirement for writing in this class is within the report, within the final submission area. Yeah, and you're getting used to Illustrator. Yes. Yeah, Illustrator used to be the program that was really worked with shapes. I still think it works with shapes a little bit better, but Photoshop actually has come a long way. So, yeah, it's good to see folks experimenting with both of those. Yeah, so in your design, what's really interesting about your design, I noticed, is that you're working only with circles. But because of the ability in this assignment to, first of all, use more shapes and also resize them, and then also the fact that there's a white and a black circle, you can do so much, really amazing things just with the basic circle, can't you? So I love what you're doing here, but overlapping, like so all of the black area in here is overlapped circles, and then you've got some white circles that are also overlapping and creating interesting, in this case it looks pretty, in some ways, this is definitely a negative space, we consider this background, but in here you could almost see, is this positive or negative, the white part here. It's hard to say. That's interesting when that happens. It's like we don't quite know, Same with this, is this a positive space or a negative space, the black? But yeah, I like the repetition of this little strategy you have here of these white sort of bands. A lot of times in design, especially when you're working abstractly like this, you can create these kind of units. I think that the Photoshop tutorial for this assignment talks a little bit about that, how you can create this kind of unit and then you can repeat it. You can copy and paste it, and that repetition, it creates a little bit of a patterning effect, which we automatically, our eyes really like that. It's visually very pleasing, and it also helps you create a really unified space. So, yeah, so good. I think your design to me also looks complete. I don't think you need to make any changes with it. Hi, Katrina. Yes, you've got some really interesting areas in your design. What I find interesting about your design is how you're kind of creating these little sort of areas with shapes in them, sort of breaking things apart, like this whole area in here is so interesting because you're doing so much overlapping. It looks like you've got white and black triangles here, and you're overlapping and overlapping so that you get these really interesting new shapes that are happening, which I think is, just really cool to be able to do this, simple geometric shapes that you're creating new sort of areas within the design. You're also, I didn't mention this with Brittany, but Brittany's working with the edges of the page. So are you, with pulling things off, which is great. So I think this, yeah, looks really good. And the only thing I might do with your design is maybe somehow there's these larger areas of negative space in here which feel like maybe they're a little empty and could be activated a bit more, that sense of activating space. So maybe just, I almost thought, well, what about taking some of these, your triangles here, the way you're working with the white and black triangles, and maybe have them flow a little bit up, maybe flow a little bit this way, just to kind of, maybe they sort of kind of sprinkle out a little bit. I don't know, maybe this is really an interesting shape too here, which you have with this bar. Maybe you could add a few in here, or you could take this horizontal and kind of, maybe it kind of flows through here or through here, just to kind of connect those areas. Yeah, otherwise that's it. Yeah, there's Well, I also know, is this, maybe it's a piece of dirt on my screen. Oh no, so it is there. Maybe, I might just kind of, if you see a little tiny blip like that, you could maybe, move things around so that you can get rid of that, because it looks like it's maybe, or make it bigger in some way, bigger, or reduce it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's, again, you'll notice as you work too, again, I always feel like there's certain kinds of things that happen in a design, like sort of, it's like a style that happens, or like, a thing, a motif. For example, you've got the bars here, um, you know, Brittany had the circles, and then you've got the black and white triangles. And when you see something interesting happening in a design, um, you can just simply, repeat that thing that you've been doing. I'm just sort of pointing out, in a way, and Dolce was doing that too. I think everybody really has been doing that. When you see that happening in a design, that's like a moment where you can think, hey, that's a really interesting thing that's happening. I'm going to, maybe play with that more. And that, again, creates this sense of repetition in the design, which really works well in uniting the spaces. Crystal. Good. I'm so glad. Yeah, this particular exercise, I think that can really, there's a lot of liberation with being able to use more shapes and also to resize the shapes. Um, and yeah, and I also think you mentioned that your creativity seems to be, I think, flowing a little bit more. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, but I think that's maybe what I don't know if let me go check here. What did you say? Oh yeah, so adjust to your creative side. Yeah, you know what? There is like a real, like, I think, flow to creativity, in the sense that when you start, it can be a little bit like, um, when I come back to the studio after a long time, there's a stiffness to it where I'm like, oh, what am I doing? What's happening? And then you just start getting more in the flow, more confident, or more, experimental, and things loosen up, which I think is just really true for really everybody, I think. Okay, yeah, and I also like what you're doing here too, with a lot of the kind of, I love what you're doing here, where you've taken the black bar and you have actually put a white bar behind it. And so it creates a new section in here. It's like, again, the negative space can sort of flow through here, which is very interesting. And also flowing through here. It's a really good strategy. I like sort of the repetition here of the squares that you have created. That's a really nice look. So I would say that just a few things in here that I might work on a little bit more. One is I might work a little bit more on pulling things off the edge. Like, I love what you're doing here by pulling these circles off. I might pull things off even more if you can. Maybe more circles, or maybe you take your white squares and then you would like make them bigger so they go off the edge. Just kind of experimenting different ways. Um, like, I might even, and I would repeat some of the things that you are having happen. Like, I might add more of these bars, in your design, to kind of repeat them. Sometimes when you have a lot of variety, because you have a lot of actually different things going on here, sometimes that can fragment a design. And so sometimes repeating things more and having less variety brings more unity in the design, if that makes sense. So maybe more, like this particular, I like what you've done here with these triangles. Like, maybe repeat that a few different places in the design. You could just take this and copy and paste it different places. If you want to, you can rotate it. You can make it bigger or smaller. You could experiment with it. You don't have to leave it exactly the way it is right there. Um, one last thing, if you go to the tutorial, the video for this, the very first one on the instructions page, it talks a little bit about how to, you want to avoid resize or reshaping the circle into an oval, and just keep it as a circle. So I've noticed just a few places here you've done that. You've actually, I think, done the oval really nicely, I have to say. Sometimes it's hard to make, ovals work in designs often, but just for the sake of the assignment, to just kind of keep without distorting any of the shapes, you can go back there and review that, And essentially, when you work with any shape at all within Illustrator or Photoshop, when you're resizing it, you would hold down that Shift key, and that will make the shape. You can resize it and make it bigger and smaller, but you won't be able to shift the shape and distort it. Okay, so yeah, I think you're going in a good direction. I just kind of keep experimenting a little bit more. Yeah, oh, I love what you're doing here with these stripes. I think that's a really nice effect, you know, kind of repeating them. They're all kind of parallel. And also the repeating triangles down here. I think that looks really good. So what I might suggest with yours is doing more overlapping, like kind of maybe bringing in some white shapes into the design and seeing how you can start overlapping those, like kind of like, let's see here with one of the examples. You know, can you see here how like all of these shapes are really starting to overlap? Like there's almost no shape that is not overlapped. Just you could say, well, you could say maybe these three circles, and everything else is joining together in some way. You don't have to make everything, but you can really see how this overlapping and connection joins the design, makes it appear that it's all harmonizing. And so I might just keep doing that a little bit more here with this design. Again, bring in some white shapes and really, really work with that a little bit more. I would probably take out this. What's to me, when I first looked at this, it looked like mountains with a sun or a moon, and I'm not sure if that's what you intended, but it sort of to me was leaning a little bit away from the abstract idea. So I would probably want to just avoid that if possible, because we're really trying to work with abstract, and just take the circle out. Maybe work with the mountains and the the stripes, and then add in more of those white shapes. Again, to start working a little bit more with that overlapping and positive and negative space, and yeah, and just keep experimenting a little bit more with it. Yeah, okay, I think that's it, everybody, for our group critique. I think everybody's really on the right track here, and so keep experimenting a little bit more. And I'll look forward to seeing your final submissions at the end of the week.